So I have really the pleasure of introducing to you Rebecca Blumenstein, who is the Deputy Managing Editor of a small, up-and-coming local newspaper called the New York Times. Rebecca, thank you for flying overnight, I think, from Cairo over here. It's really a pleasure to have you. We have 20 minutes during which we are going to talk about journalism in turbulent times. And when we prepared this session, we decided we will try to cover 5 topics, which are coronavirus, Ukraine, China, the rise of autocratic governments in the world compared to the former decade, and fake news. So we have 5 topics, 20 minutes. It's 4 minutes for each topic. 3 minutes will be the question, 1 minute will be your answer.
And I'm happy to be here, Yossi, I must say. I'm usually the one asking the questions, so it's only because I like you that I'm submitting to this.
Right,
so.
we are changing the... Here is Steffi. Steffi, you want to join us? Bring a chair and join us. Rebecca, the New York Times nobody is impartial to New York Times. There are people which revere it, they're regarding it to be their church. There are people who loves it, there are people who hate it, but nobody is impartial. Why the New York Times raise these kind of emotions?
I mean, I think that in many ways, and first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be back at DLD. I think I was here pre-pandemic, probably about 4 years ago, so it's great to be back. The Times, I think, because of our size, because of our ambition, because of our reach, attracts a lot of scrutiny, and that's okay. I mean, I think that we really view our mission to seek the truth, to help people better understand the world, to hold governments to account. And I think, sometimes annoy people because, quite frankly, we don't choose one side or the other. And people would like us to, but we disappoint those who expect us to advocate for their cause. And yet we really believe, and our business model is just producing original journalism that's worth paying for. And increasingly, that involves a lot of different things, whether it's cooking or games or The Athletic. The Wirecutter, we want to bring people in, and even, they may have a visceral reaction to our opinion page or some things on our opinion page, but we think that over time, but if we produce enough journalism that's worth paying for, that we will become valuable to them, even if they disagree with us. And we really do believe fundamentally that one of the biggest problems in this world right now is that people are in thought bubbles, and they need to have facts, they need to have truth, and they need to have information that challenges basic assumptions.
Good. As an example to your reaction to emerging or bursting or change in the world, can you give us a short brief? How were you treating the information regarding the corona? As all of us remember, in the beginning it was very foggy. Nobody knew what's going on. Nobody knew what are the authoritative resources. The New York Times stepped into this void very successfully. Please tell us a little bit about it.
It was it's hard to remember now. I mean, it's hard to believe that it was 2.5 years ago that in Wuhan there was this mysterious virus that started spreading. And the first thing we did is we launched something called a live briefing, which provided regular updates, constant 24/7 around the world. And we started fueling that, obviously, with our reporters around the world, but the big decision that we made in those early moments is a realization that governments were not keeping track of the data. Even the United States, under President Trump, was not keeping track of the data. So we got teams together and launched something called the COVID Data Tracker, and cobbling together data from all different kinds of sources, because quite frankly, in the US, our government failed to do that. And so the COVID Data Tracker, which is still on the Times app if you go, has become one of the most trafficked items of journalism in New York Times history, and it has provided, you know, state by state, hospitalizations, deaths, the very basic accountability of the coronavirus around the world when governments, and many of them really did fail to keep account of what was happening. At one point in the coronavirus, we had 5 different live briefings covering the US, the world, business, New York as it hit New York. And I think it was really a turning point for us in terms of, you know, in moments of breaking news, in moments when people need reliable information. We used to, in previous times, kind of do a story at the end of a day for print. But if you think about the pandemic and kind of your reaction as a reader, you wanted to know what was going on. You needed a trusted source of information. And quite frankly, we see an opportunity there. And data is a really key way to do that, because in an age of political polarization, data is the truth. Data is the facts, and we all, if we are actually assembling said data, can add transparency and become a reliable source of information for millions of people around the world.
But from what you say, it seems that you are realizing more and more that, like, immediate news are very important. And of course, you cannot do it on print, but you cannot do it on online. Do you want to become another version of CNN?
I mean, CNN is certainly a big competitor of ours, and we feel that we have journalists around the world. We have 30 bureaus around the world, and hundreds of journalists. We are a company of 5,000, 2,000 journalists, and we think that this is our value add, right? With the Ukraine, we have a live briefing on the Ukraine, and well more than 200 journalists have contributed to that. So if we collectively can have those journalists filing dispatches, whether it's from the Pentagon or the front lines in Ukraine, what's happening in Russia, business, economics, that is something that's truly valuable. And you're right, I mean, obviously in the digital space, I mean, Google and in terms of search and platforms, which we of course need to live with, they rank news outlets that update their stories, that don't file once a day, and I think readers certainly do as well. They want a place where they can come to for reliable news, and I think the optimistic thing, there are many pessimistic things in journalism these days, but the optimistic thing is that I think over the past few years, whether it's the Times or the Post, or I'm on Columbia Journalism Review, I mean, many consumers, and I thank them, have come to the realization, I think, that half of what they see on social media is right, half of it's wrong, that what they see on their platforms is not as trusted, and whoever you subscribe to, I think there has been a basic shift, and we were probably helped a bit by Netflix, to be honest, that a subscription, if you want quality original content, a subscription is, and that is what has saved the journalism industry, a subscription is, for original journalism that's worth paying for, is something that we think is powerful and a real possibility for future growth.
Can you share with us one word how you handle these conspiracy theories about vaccines before we leave the COVID altogether?
I mean, it's a great question. We have tried to, with data, with stories, with misinformation, ways of, through bursts of, through, visually, digitally, quoting authorities and looking at, obviously, the impact, the very uneven, because we have the data, impact of coronavirus deaths in states where not all, but many, there's no question that the number of deaths in states where the governors were coming out or not advocating, or local authorities or representatives for the vaccine, they're much higher. And
were you vaccinated, if I can ask? You don't have to answer.
3 times.
Did you drink Lysol?
I did not. But this is, we just passed 1 million deaths from coronavirus in the United States. And the other day, it was on Sunday, we had a double truck, and this is a kind of a good example of what we're doing, both kind of, we're innovating in print and also digitally. we had the front page of the New York Times was not the front page that day. It was like both sides of the front page was a map of the U.S. with no words, but with graphic representations of the states in which the most people died. I'm from Michigan. There were a lot of deaths in Michigan. But it's fascinating to see it. And then there was an interactive edition. And we quoted very prominently in the digital version a physician who said the tragic part about the United States is that we had the vaccine really early, and yet so many people died.
Yeah. Okay, let's try and talk a little bit about Ukraine,
Okay.
Russia, how you cover it, how you decide what position you take, how you push back the attempt to try to get messages through you, etc. Please.
First of all, we have people on the ground, and for anyone who's in media these days,
On the ground means where?
in Ukraine.
In Ukraine.
In Ukraine.
In what cities?
I don't want to be specific, but they're throughout the country. Our daily podcast in the early days of the attack was actually broadcast from there. Sabrina Tabernisi, one of our reporters, who's a host of the Daily, rightly saw what was happening and got into the country. We have been on the ground in Ukraine since the beginning. We have also sadly pulled out of Russia for now and have a bureau in exile because of the media law there.
Really? Wow.
And we are doing everything we can to keep our people safe, of course, and are distressed. I mean, I just looked at the figure. 23 journalists have died since the beginning of the conflict in the Ukraine, so it's very dangerous, but so important to hold, to show the world what's happening on the ground. One of our photographers, and it's through words, it's through stories. I think visuals are really powerful right now. One of our photographers, Lindsay Adario, took a photo, which kind of controversial. It wasn't really controversial, but it was something that we hadn't done before, rather, of a woman and her 2 children and a companion. You may remember this photo, who very early on, when they were trying to cross a bridge, there was an explosion and they all died. We don't usually put pictures of dead bodies on the top of our website or our front page, but we did in this instance because we felt it was very important. And that photo was shown on the floor of Congress that next week, and just was a very powerful statement about what was happening. We also have done a lot with video investigations, which is a way that we're using digital journalism, basically, to hold the power to account. The Russians in Bucha obviously said that there had been no atrocities. We used satellite images to show that there had been no atrocities while they were there, and we used satellite images to show that bodies had been there for several days and during the time the Russians were there. And then the other day came out with another investigation that showed that 8 men how they had been executed, basically. And what's happening, whether it's January 6th or any, we are using all the different forms of media, particularly video, and being shot from cell phones. And part of this video that from the Bucha investigation was someone in their house taking a picture of the Russians and compiling it all together into a definitive account that I think, in an era of questions about the media transparency, when you see it, it's incredibly powerful and very hard to refute.
Okay. I remember very vividly 31st of December, 11:59 at night, 1999.
Oh my.
You remember it? Times Square in New York, countdown to the beginning of the 3rd millennia. Actually, it was not exactly the beginning. The beginning was in 2001, but the counting down was 2000. All of us were very optimistic. We are entering a new era of the world. Fukuyama wrote The End of History. Everybody was very optimistic. And look what happened in the last 20 years. Millions of people died in all kinds of places in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and governments, which were supposed to become much more democratic, became much more autocratic. How it affects the journalism and how the journalism affects this process?
I think there's no question. I worked in China in 2005 in the run-up to the Beijing Olympics, which is now almost Precambrian times in China. It was a long time ago, but it was an era of opening, and it was an era where people felt that it was a matter of time. And the prevailing view was that democracy and capitalism would open up and pave the way around the world for more democracy. And clearly that thinking, that did not happen. In fact, the opposite happened. And I think there's many explanations for it, but at the root cause, it certainly has not been good for journalism. As you mentioned, I was just in Egypt, and we met with press leaders there, and it's literally seeing, a pretty thriving press, a history of democratic press, and they told us that it's never been worse. The censorship, the fact there are some very brave independent journalists there. They are very brave, and there are many that have been jailed. And around the world, the Committee to Protect Journalists has chronicled consistently, sadly, every single year more journalists are killed than ever before. And there's no question that the United States, which was a beacon of free press around the world, we would through our example, I think, put pressure on governments and leaders to uphold free press in their successive countries. And then when we had a leader who attacked us as the enemy of the people, who attacked the press, this whole notion of fake news, which is very insidious. It's a term that companies use and governments use to now describe anything they, quite frankly, don't like. It's become very perilous for journalists in many countries. We're seeing some good steps back in the right direction in the United States, but this is not something that should be taken for granted, press freedom. And even in the United States, there's growing concern about press freedom in the United States with the Supreme Court. So this is something that is not. That should not be assumed as a right anywhere in the world, and we appreciate everyone who supports journalists wherever they are.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I wanted to ask you if you think part of the responsibility is of the social networks, and if yes, how. I wanted to ask you so many more questions, but I think we will have to invite you to come next year to continue the dialogue. Rebecca, like always, it was great. Thank you again for coming, and thank you for sharing with us your thought about journalism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yossi.